Greetings everyone, and thank you for tuning into this special podcast. I am Jerry O'Willy, and on this episode, we focus on the World Book and Copyright Day. We'll dive into the rich world of African literature, its past, present, and future, while asking an important question. Does reading still matter in a digital-dominated world? Of course, I am joined by two wonderful guests. First, Douglas Okwach, a senior editor for CGTN's Talk Africa show.
Thanks, Jerry. Nice to be here again.
Douglas is a veteran journalist with decades of experience telling African stories across multiple platforms. And also with us, a senior CGTN reporter and an avid book reader, someone who is passionate about African literature and is also understandably an advocate for African reads. Wilkista Nyabwa, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't wait to dive into this particular subject.
Great to have you both. Great to have you both. Now, let's start with the basics. World Book and Copyright Day. This is all about celebrating books, authors, and the power of reading. But in today's fast-paced digital world, where short videos and social media dominate, books seem to actually be losing quite the touch that they had in the olden days. Douglas, what do you think is the place of books, the physical books, in today's world?
I think the emergence of online and digital spaces should not be confused for absence or lack of reading. I think people still read as much as they used to. It's just platforms that have changed. So my view is that digital spaces provide an alternative to what books used to provide. However, there's also data that suggests that there's really little decline. There isn't so much decline as people might think. Because I see 2024 printed book sales in the US totaled 782 million units. That is 23% increase over the last decade. So that's a rise. Then the market share, the physical books still account for roughly 80 to 85% of publishing revenue in major markets like the UK and the US. And surprisingly, again, this is research, this is not my own findings, surprisingly, roughly 75% of young adults, that is the age between 18 to 29, prefer reading physical books over digital formats. So there's really no decline. I think the decline is more of a perception thing than the reality.
Yeah, but Wilkista, when you listen to what Douglas says, of course, you probably have a better understanding of the younger generation, the African generation, the Kenyans here, and other Africans from other countries. Do you think that statement stands? Of course, Douglas gives us the stats from the US and how these numbers are still quite impressive. They're really impressive, Douglas.
Yeah, quite, actually.
But now, looking at the figures or the interactions that we have with the common Kenyans, the youth, does it portray the same tale that Douglas is giving us, Wilkista?
I do think it's the same thing. My experience is maybe I don't really have numbers, but it's more anecdotal. I'm one of those people. I read both physically and online. I also have an e-reader that I do carry around. And so I experience the best of both worlds, I think. And I think it's mostly just created different platforms. I have an e-reader. I got an e-reader specifically because it's easier for me, especially when I want to carry books when I travel. And I want to carry 10 different books because I'm reading different things simultaneously. It's not very practical. It makes my luggage heavier when I'm lugging around 10 or 15 books. It makes it easier when I just have an e-reader. I can download into it. I have a wide spectrum of things I'm reading. But even online, the way we share information, a lot of us are on our phones, we're on our tablets. It has also broken down barriers because right now we can share. I know what people are reading across the continent. People are able to share their reading lists. I think this is nice because ABCD, even if I can't find a physical copy of whatever they're reading at my local bookshop, I can quickly buy a digital copy so it makes it very easy. I don't really have the kind of worries I used to have about not being able to find a book in copy. So I do think it's just moving things forward. It's moving with technology. People are still reading. We just have so many more different choices, and that also encourages reading.
If you may just allow me to jump in there, of course, again, more data talks about digital as gateway, not as replacement. And then we talk about TikTok. But I can also see there is book talk. book and talk, T-O-K. And basically what we are talking about here is that social media platforms like TikTok and Instagram have actually significantly boosted book sales. I tend to see more books, more promotional items about books online, which actually raise my appetite for reading. And Willikista, I think, has captured it here very well, that hybrid habits. I think people are forming hybrid habits, a bit of digital, a bit of physical, which is also a good thing. And data here says that adults, talking about people who are 18 and over, about 33% of adults are now avid hybrid readers, that there is no discrimination. If it is good on digital, it is as well good in physical.
You said
but
33%.
But I'll talk about the differences.
You said 33%.
Yeah, the data says 33% of hybrid, people who balance between digital and physical books.
Wait, let me jump in here and also talk about, apart from the fact that we are reading on like e-readers, the other thing about being digital or online is that there are sites where authors are able, like some of them are just people who are writing for fun, are able to go in and instantly publish their books. There are sites where, you know, you have a wide array of books, of literary works that you can read at no cost. And I do think one of the things that we also don't discuss is the cost of, especially physical media, books, is that often access might be limited to the people who might be able to go over and hand over money. But there's so much that is available for people to read now, even if you don't have those kind of resources. And we're not talking about the pirated ones. We're talking about legitimate sources where the authors have authorized it, and you can read, you can build your vocabulary, you can enjoy the fiction or non-fiction, and without spending a lot of money, which is also a good thing.
Surprisingly, I don't do digital books at all.
Oh,
I am
really?
still the guy. I think I'm still the 67% of people, because if you say only 33% do hybrid, I'm still part of the 67% that prefer reading the physical books.
Physical books
I would rather
only.
have my book there. And
Yeah.
she talked of having a variety of books.
Yes.
I'm assuming you read this variety at the same time?
I do. Okay, I do read a cross-section of books. I will be reading maybe like 5 or 6 books together at the same time, because what I read on the day depends on how I feel on the day. You know, some days I want a pick-me-up. And so when I go home, I continue the book that, you know, puts me in that kind of headspace. Some days I need motivation. So when I go home, I'm not reading the fantasy or the fiction. I've gone back to, you know, like a biography or something. So because I usually have an array, if I travel out of town, I can't pick just one. So I need my 6 or 7 books, because I don't know which mood I will be on that particular day.
That's not me.
But
That's
Jerry,
not me, Douglas.
Jerry, let me tell you why you are in the right place, probably at the right time.
Yeah.
There is something called deep reading advantage. And this deep reading advantage is actually offered by physical books. That physical books give you cognitive benefit. That is, studies consistently show that reading on paper improves comprehension. You know, like some of us have edited, and you don't believe that a copy is clean until you see a physical aspect of it. So that this physical reading, that when you read on paper, it actually improves your comprehension and your retention compared to reading on screens, where the habit of skimming is more, you know, the scrolling, that you want it quick. You know, it's like the bag at the fast food. And then there is also a study that talks about mental health, that physical books are increasingly viewed as a primary tool for digital detox. That there is a way that digital consumption intoxicates. So you need a detox. And that reading books physically offers that mental balance. and what they call digital detox.
I will agree fully.
So these are advantages of reading physical.
I will agree fully. And also,
Yeah.
I think I would be so distracted if I went the digital route. I don't know how you maintain your discipline when you're trying to read, probably from your tablet, how you maintain your discipline to not try to check something else, to not try to check Jerry's text or someone else text you while you're in the middle of your reading, and then it just takes away your attention from whatever it is that you're reading.
Let me tell you, I totally understand what you're saying, because one of the reasons I have a very old-fashioned e-reader, and the only thing it does is you can buy a book, you can purchase a book, and you can read it. And I specifically chose it because I found maybe the newer versions were a bit more tab-like, and it's a bit more like, I had all the other services that I have on my phone, which can be a distraction. So when I'm on my e-reader, the only thing it can do is read, and I appreciate that. But I will say that I do understand, especially I think the online space gets very noisy, and not just the noise that you can hear in your ear, but there's always something popping up. You have notifications, you have a million things. One of my favorite places to read, surprisingly, I think it's one of the reasons I enjoy long flights. And there was a particular flight that we used to take that used to be, I think, about 7 hours without Wi-Fi online and without any other online services. No screens, no nothing. So you had to sit there. You had either downloaded your book, or you'd carried your physical book, or you had nothing. And therefore, you have no opportunity to do anything else, which I truly appreciate.
Of course, assuming also that there is little turbulence. 30 minutes of turbulence can be very disruptive,
especially if you're
reading while flying.
Yes, especially if you're reading the kind of fiction that is a bit wild. It's about an apocalypse, and now you're up in the air with all the possibilities of everything that could happen. But anyway, I do enjoy it.
Yeah, but I agree with Wilkinson on the ebook thing. I think it enforces discipline, because you are not accessible to multiple things as you would say, for example, when you are reading on your phone, because you find access to other things very easy, and some of them, like you say, keep popping up, and that can really disrupt your flow of reading.
True, but then one thing I will say maybe about this is that even now, sometimes I will still go back to reading on my phone because it's convenient, and I don't always have my e-reader with me, but the one thing I always have is my phone. So whenever I find myself, waiting for a friend, or I'm on a bus, I'm in a matatu, I always go back to the one thing I have in my hand is my phone. And that for me, I am able to silence the noise, mostly because I enjoy reading. Once I get into it, everything else pauses, and it doesn't matter how, people are calling, or it's like walking into a bubble, immersing myself. And then sometimes when I alight from the vehicle and I put away my phone, then I'm like, oh, back in the real world.
And as we celebrate books, I want us to channel this conversation now towards African authors and African books. And of course, Africa has produced great writers and has produced great stories over the years. Talk about Chinua Achebe, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Wole Soyinka, just to mention but a few, and I would consider these to be the classic African writers. But we've also got the new generation writers, the contemporary writers of today, the Chimamanda Ngozi Adichies. We have also Mia Couto, Ya Gyasi, and many others that are still doing the trade and doing it really, really well, telling African stories and helping the whole world understand the African culture, the African traditions, in the manner that you can only do in writing. Why is it important to have such minds still exist today, as Africa also tries to tell its own stories now? Douglas.
Let me talk about very briefly about African oral traditions. African oral traditions are a way of passing people's culture, people's traditions, people's way of life, food, and all these things through orally, orally. However, one of the most interesting things that happened to Africa is that when the colonialists came, they did not think that oral tradition is authentic, that there is no way, that they believed in stories that could be corroborated, that can be verified, that things that are anecdotal, that are passed on orally, cannot be authenticated. And then therefore Africa didn't have any history. So they started writing Africa's history from scratch, not believing that Africa already was very rich in its own history through its oral traditions, which is a way of passing, you know, our way of life, our cultures, our tradition, the food we eat, the music we listen to, you know, the clothes we wear, you know, and so on and so forth. So one of the things that for me is key to African writers and African writing is to reclaim, you know, to reclaim our narrative, which was taken, you know, and changed, you know, in history and in social spaces. We talk about revisionists or revisionism, the idea that what originally was is no longer is, because somebody has changed that story. And this is what early European writers did to Africa by changing the African story. So what I see in the generation that followed these early writers about Africa, the white people, is a generation of writers that were trying to correct a course that had gone wrong. So for me, it's about owning the narrative, telling our own stories, our lived experiences. So that's very key to me. So that's a very important role of our writing, of our writers, of our story, and so on.
And do you foresee probably in the next, in the decades that are coming ahead, would they also be in the same standing as the Ngugi wa Thiong'os? Because these are really, really acclaimed, well-acclaimed authors, the Wole Soyinkas. Some of these people were even in conversations for the Nobel Prize. We have people who really, really did a good job in telling the African stories. Of course, in the manner that they did, with the resources that they had back then and with the competition that existed when you look at the Western world and the kind of resources that they had and the authors that they had in the numbers that they had. So do you think in the next probably 10, 20 years, these contemporary writers will also take that place and now lead the continent's narration?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question again, Jerry, and it's quite intriguing. You know, to try to make a comparison would not be the right thing to do, because I think there is some form of continuity in which we tell our stories, in which African stories are told by Africans. It's just that the way that we tell, even the music, if you leave the storytelling, even the music, if you look at African music in the 50s, in the 60s, and then you look at African music in the 2000s, there's a world of difference in approach, in messaging, and so on and so forth. So my view is that the messaging will continue, except that the way we are used to, you know, passing that message is what changes. You know, for example, if you want to communicate with urban population, you know, younger people, from some sections of, say, the city of Nairobi, you do not speak formal Kiswahili or even English. But there's a mix of both, which they understand and which they enjoy and which convey the messages. So for me, that is how I understand these transitions and how the message keeps being passed on. When I was younger, I had an uncle who, you know, would tell us stories until late in the morning, you know, oral stories, and I really enjoyed them. I think that generation is gone. So we no longer have uncles that lie down with us on bed and tell us stories up to around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. So instead, we now have books. But the message is the same. I saw some of these early books, particularly by African writers, actually are about African folklore, African tradition, you know, the story of the hare and the hyena, things like that, packed with message, packed with wisdom, you know, and stuff like that. So as time changes, I think the way we convey and transmit the message changes. But the message necessarily for me remains the same. Yeah. Of course, a bit of distortion here and there does happen, but it consistently remains the same message.
The primary message.
Yeah,
is
the
still
primary
there.
message.
Nice. And we're already talking about some of these African authors, and I think now I want us to narrow down. I did ask all of us before.
I wanted to talk about,
Okay,
I wanted to revisit that, just the importance of the African story and telling it. It's what Dagi says is that it's important for us to reclaim our stories. And then there's more than that for me. Let me give an example. For me, I did not grow up in the capital. I didn't grow up in Nairobi. I grew up outside a mid-sized town, but still not in the capital. And so I was a reader from the time I was very young. And when I started out with all the books that were common. There were British books, there were American books, there were Western books with all these stories. And then we started reading a number of African stories. I don't know if people remember, of course, there's The Hare and Other Tales. And then there are the other series of books, Beautiful Nyakio and The Giant and other stories. And then we went into it. And then I started becoming very interested, you know, like in a lot of the African stories. Because when I was reading the books, like remember Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, there were nice books, the Enid Blyton books, The Famous Five, Secret Seven. They were nice books, but they were not necessarily relevant to me. I wasn't camping on an island or, you know, helping to solve a crime. They were not particularly relevant to my particular situation or life at the time. But when I started reading African books. You remember we used to have the Peseta series, and those books were about stories that were not necessarily Kenyan. I was learning things about Nigerians. I was learning things about West Africans. I'm like, oh, is that what happens in Uganda? When we're reading the Barbara Kimenye Moses series, you know, you are getting a glimpse and you start to realize that our stories are similar. Like people in Uganda, people in Tanzania, people in Mozambique, people in South Africa, people who speak French. At some point, we had a number of West African books that kind of veered towards the guys who bordered the Francophone countries. And so you'd realize that their stories were a little different. You learn a lot about people, and then you learn that at the end of the day, we all just want similar things. And it broadened my perspective of the things I wanted out of life. I didn't particularly want to be Nancy Drew, but I could see how you could become a musician in Ghana, in Cote d'Ivoire, you know, the different possibilities that were available to an African child. And they were bigger than my small town, and it made me dream outside my small town because I thought these things are possible. People are doing them across the African continent. My little town is not an impediment. And so it taught me to dream. But then here's another thing that my sister says, and my sister is an avid reader. Maybe she reads even more than I do. My sister says, good science fiction walks the thin line between fantasy and real life. So I think one of the other things that African stories now are doing, we are looking back, we are reclaiming our history, but we're also looking forward. It's really nice for me to see that we are also, you know, there's good science fiction that is coming out of African readers, what the future could possibly look like for us. They're also redefining the future for us. And I think that is basically the importance of an African story, that now we are getting a whole 360-degree view of cultures and things that are relevant and very personal to us.
Nice. And
the greedy, those stories are, I really like Will Kister's examples. You know, this thing about moral lesson. And the way we were taught, you know, morality and being a good person, you know, how to live with others at the young age. So my uncle tells me the story of the hare, the greedy hare, and the spider. So there is a feast in heaven, and the hare has been invited. But because the hare cannot get to heaven, because to get to heaven you need a string, a ladder, which the spider has. So they get to heaven using the spider's ladder. But hare decides to enjoy the feast himself, forgetting the spider. So the angry spider decides to come back to earth with his ladder. So when the feast is over, the hare discovers an angry spider has left. So he jumps back down to earth, and you can imagine what happened to him. So this is how we were taught the moral lesson, the danger of greed and things, but using little stories like that. And they were quite fascinating. So that was one of the functions of these stories, as we were told.
I could see even as Wilkista was giving those examples, you were really nodding there. It's like she took you back to a world that you had put in some corner somewhere.
Absolutely.
That was really interesting. But now let's channel this conversation towards what Wilkista has already started. Now looking at these authors and the books. And earlier on, before we came here, I asked us to bring our favorite books or our favorites, the favorite publications in our home shelves. And I can see Wilkista was clearly struggling. She couldn't pick one. She carried a lot.
I carried everything, and I ran out of space in the morning because I couldn't decide on just one.
Okay, so I also struggled a bit to decide on what my best read is. And as I was checking my shelf, and I think this is also a case, I suspect, of recency bias. You know, you feel something is the best because it's something that is still fresh in your memory. The book that I selected was The Big Conservation Lie. I don't know if any one of you has read that.
This one by
Mordecai
Ogada and the journalist.
Yes.
The environmental journalist.
Yes.
Interesting book.
I think that is one of the best reads I have read in a while. Just by how they explain things that are really in front of our eyes when it comes to Kenyan conservation matters, but we do not see them until someone puts them into perspective for you, and how Kenya, of course, with some foreigners, do some practices that you would consider normal, but then when someone just looks at them keenly and puts a spotlight there, you start figuring out, okay, this is not normal now. And I think the work that they did with that, exposing some of the lies that are told within the conservation area, and some of the racism aspects that exist, the neo-colonization aspects that are still in that industry. It was a very interesting read for me, because I would say I love the stories about conservation, tourism, and stuff like that. So when someone gives me all the nitty-gritties, the behind the scenes happening, the things that actually happen behind the stories that we are told on television, the content that we get via newspapers, I think it was a very interesting read. I don't know if you've both read it. I don't know how you'd rate it.
Maybe let me not talk about the book. Let me talk about the attempt to do a show on that book. Actually, while here at CGTN on Talk Africa, and for 3 months, really, it's a show we planned and kept shelving because Professor Mordecai and his friend, the journalist, what is his name again?
John Mbaria.
John Mbaria, who worked, I think, at The Nation and at the East African, as a brilliant conservation journalist. So we wanted them to come on television and discuss this book. But they kept growing cold feet for whatever reason. Then what I learned from their reluctance to come on television and talk about this book was the quiet and dark forces in the conservation world, and who pays who and who decides who speaks about what. Because at the time, I think Professor Mordecai was in some conservancy in Nanyuki.
Nanyuki, yes.
So I made many calls. He kept promising, and at some point we also talked to other conservations because we wanted two voices on the show. Of course, in the book they make claims, so we wanted voices that either corroborated, buttress those claims, or voices that challenge those claims. So we were unable to put together a show until today on the white conservation lie. A very appetizing title of a book.
Very.
And which makes very serious claims about the world of conservation. But interesting, of course. Thank you.
Read, yeah? What do you think of it?
I have skimmed, let me say, I will not pretend to have read it. I have skimmed through it, and I know the premise of it. But I I haven't read it. I haven't completed it. I know the premise of it, and I do think it's important. It's one of those things that it's exactly what we're talking about documentation. That it's one of those things that puts down information so that people will be able to come back years from now. Maybe our children, our children's children can always come and revisit. When you wonder what exactly happened at this point, then you always have a point of reference, which I think is good. Should I read it? Yes, I should. I should get round to it. But I'm glad that it is somewhere. There's a physical copy, that it's somewhere, and that I can access that information.
For sure. And just keep going now that you have the mic.
Now that I have the mic, let me tell you, do you know, I'm a little embarrassed because I feel like I went overboard a little, and yet I tried to rein myself in. I did. I have a number of books, a number of favorites. Well, is it a number of favorites? I could not decide which one was my favorite, and some of my favorites are not in hard copy. They're in soft copy. I think my ultimate, let me start with what I definitely thought, I do collect the Moses series by Barbara Kimenye, just because they were a very happy part of my childhood, something I would like to pass on to the next generation. I think it's a happy introduction to reading. And then I have Jennifer Makumbi's Kintu, which, well, yes, I did enjoy that particular read. I do have my ultimate favorite. I do have here The Secret Lives of Baba Shegi's Wives. I do believe that's how it is pronounced. I enjoyed it. And I also think one of the other functions that literature serves, I do think we do have stories that definitely share moral lessons, but reading is also fun. Reading is interesting. I do enjoy, there's a message that this book imparts, but it's also funny. There's a sense of humor. I laughed through half the book because it was funny. It was hilarious. And it made me laugh, it made me think, and I thought, like, serious books don't always just have to be full of seriousness and nothing else. You can laugh a little while you learn the lesson. But ultimately, I do think my favorite African read of all time will always be Things Fall Apart. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I remember reading it, and, just my mind was blown at the thought of how the prose is beautiful, the writing is beautiful, the sentence structure. Of course, these are things I look at as a writer, because reading other writers also teaches me things. I think, how do you construct a story? How do you tell? How do you share ideas? How do you introduce an idea or a character? Those are all the things I learned. But it's also just, it goes into history. It imparts important lessons, and it's just a very beautiful book. And I always remember that he wrote it when he was very young. I think it was published when he was 23, if I am not wrong. And I'm in awe of how fully formed and fleshed his characters were, how three-dimensional they were, how they lived and they were breathing. To this day, I still reference things, like when my sister talks to me and I'm cooking, it's late, like it's 8 or it's 9, and she calls me and I'm still cooking. She says, are you like that woman with a pestle? Like everybody has gone to bed and she's still pounding yam with her pestle, or sometimes she'll ask me for something and I'll tell her, like Okonkwo's dad who owed everyone money. I'll say, all these people, I owe them, and you don't see them standing here knocking on my door. There's so many references. The people there are three-dimensional. They're real people. They live and breathe. I hear them. I see them. And I hope that one day we get to a point where we can also tell such stories.
For sure. Douglas.
Brilliant. Nice listening to you, Wilkista. Of course, Nigeria is literally, in African terms, Nigeria is a literary giant. Producing people like Chinua Achebe, producing people like writers like Wole Soyinka, writers like Eleki Amadi, of course now Chimamanda Adichie, so it's a powerhouse really, and I think they deserve that place because they try to write in a way that expresses how they live. They write the way they live, which make their writing exceptional. I brought my book, Jerry. Of course, it was very easy to pick. It was very easy to pick.
Unlike
so,
Winchester's.
yeah, so I just picked one, Long Walk to Freedom. Long Walk to Freedom, an autobiography of Nelson Mandela. I don't know how many, I think I've read this book a couple of times, not just once, maybe 2-3 times. Sometimes I just flip through paragraphs. And I can't say enough about this book. So I picked just 3 core areas about the book. That is the early life and education of Nelson Mandela. His father named him Rorilala.
I think
Rorilala is a tongue twister. That name is a tongue twister, you know. He was born in 1918 in Kunu, that village where his body was finally interred in Kunu. So the book talks about his early life and education, and of course the political awakening, you know, the political awakening. When he joined the ANC, the African National Congress, Africa's oldest political party, way back in 1944. And Mandela was already, you know, in the move as Apartheid, the national party, you know, the Boers, you know, the national party was implementing apartheid, you know, a system of governance that shocked the world with its brutality and atrocities, you know, compared only to what we've seen in Gaza, you know, in the Israel-Gaza thing. And I think that's why South Africa takes exceptions and takes particular positions when it comes to the Israel-Gaza, the Israel-Palestine issue, because it reminds them of apartheid. So he formed a party, and I don't know, there's similarities here, and these names are quite hard to read. Umkhonto Wesizwe. Is that Jacob Zuma's? Is that Jacob Zuma's party? Umkhonto Wesizwe. Yeah, so the political life of Nelson Mandela captures it in this Long Walk to Freedom. And of course the imprisonment, his lonely stay for 27 years in Robben Island, you know, the Alcatraz. You've watched the movie Escape from Alcatraz. You don't escape from Alcatraz. And of course freedom and the march to freedom. 1990s, you know, until independence in 1994. But the key things about Nelson Mandela, which you learn from his book, Long Walk to Freedom, is the resilience and sacrifice. You know, that life of prison, for detached, removed from society, removed from his family, for him to survive was not very easy. And then also the idea, the value of forgiveness and reconciliation. You know, at independence, Nelson Mandela formed a government of national unity with white people. And many South Africans were not amused that how come again you brought back the oppressor into government. So that spirit and the definition of courage. And if you allow me, I'd like to read a quote that I picked. There are too many, but I'll just read one. Apart from life, a strong constitution and an abiding connection to the Thembu royal house, the only thing my father bestowed upon me at birth was a name, Rorilaha. It is Hosa. Hosa. So the name literally means pulling the branch of a tree. You know, a branch of a tree can be big and can be heavy, but its colloquial form, meaning, is accurately captured in troublemaker. Nelson Mandela was a troublemaker. He was a troublemaker. Yeah. But of course, he says he does not believe in that these names defined him, that these names charted his destiny, that charted his path. But in the end, people did tell him that he was indeed somebody who pulled the big branch of the tree, looking at the sacrifices he made for South Africa. So it's a very interesting book. Talks a lot about Africa, political systems, the movement for freedom, the liberation fight, the people who stood with Mandela, the people who stood with South Africa, and so on and so forth. So that's my favorite pick.
Nice. But it would still be very unfair for only 3 journalists during the World Book and Copyright Day to give their opinions on what they consider to be their favorite reads. Of course, in a newsroom that has tens of other journalists that also read very avidly. And so earlier on, I also spoke to some of our colleagues here at CGTN to just give us some of their best reads. And we have quite a couple of them. I just wanted to, I'm going to read through them, and then I want the 3 of us to pick one from the books that we have here and the books that were submitted earlier, and then we'll pick one and decide that to be our 2026 read. And probably if we haven't read it, we're going to read it. And if our listeners haven't read it, they might want to consider reading it. So, of course, we have The Long Walk to Freedom by Douglas. We have Wilkista's, are they 7 books or 8 books?
Let us stick to Chinua Achebe's. Yes, let us stick. Things Fall Apart.
So we have Long Walk to Freedom, we have Things Fall Apart, and we have The Big Conservation Lie. And the other things that, the other submissions that were given to me, of course, someone else also mentioned Things Fall Apart.
Oh, popular read.
We also had someone mentioning A Grain of Wheat. I'm sure you've read that, Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Yes, Ngugi wa Thiong'o.
Which was a very interesting story on Kenya's independence era. We also had someone mention The Season of Migration to the North by Tayed Sali. That's a Sudanese novel that's detailing the encounter between the East and the West. We also had, and I don't know why we didn't discuss this here, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. That's an interesting read as well. And also we had some people also mentioning some of the the contemporary writers, the ones that still do the trade even now. We had someone mention Americana, Chimamanda's book.
Chimamanda also.
We had someone mention Homegoing by Ya Gyasi. We had someone mention Kintu by Jennifer Makumbi.
Yeah, it's here.
It's here with Wilkista. We had someone also mention the book that you also mentioned, The Secret Lives of Babasegi's wives. So we have a couple of books. And from those that I have mentioned, which one, I'll start with you, Wilkista, which one would you put at the very top of your reads list?
I will vote for my own choice. Of course, I will go for, Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe.
Right.
I'm staying there, and someone else supports me because there are 2 of us.
So now you have 2 votes. Douglas, who has your vote?
Yeah,
Are you sticking with the Mandelas?
The challenge with that list you've given it's very difficult to choose, because these writers they punch their own weight. They throw their own weight around. But I think the undisputed writer, if you look at this list, would always be Chinua Achebe. For obvious reasons, and also for the reason, for example, my personal reason is because it was my set book. It's a book, it's my literature set book in secondary school. So it's a book I read and I was tested on, and I passed my literature. Yeah, so of course I am very sentimental about liberation, the decolonization and things like that. Of course, that's why I brought along Long Walk to Freedom. But the true African story is properly captured by Chinua Achebe in Things Fall Apart. And sometimes things do really fall apart in Africa.
And on my
so
side,
I'll vote for Wilkista's
Things Fall Apart.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Wilkista, you have... So now those are 3 votes.
Those are 3 votes. Those are 3 votes.
Make
so
it
far.
4, because I'm also going to vote for it. Because I feel, as you mentioned earlier, the way Chinua gave you a really detailed version of events and how he described his characters. And as you're reading, you literally created someone in your mind as though they existed right in front of you. And very few writers are able to do that, where even in the settings, he would describe every detail, including even stones. You would have a whole picture in your mind of everything, the setting, the characters, and the storyline. You would literally be in the middle of his mind when you're reading his book. And I think definitely that should be our 2026 book.
I hope so, because I always think, I feel it's timeless. I think the events that he details are things that happen again and again. They're not, well, not all of them, but it's nothing new. It's basically human character that we see over and over again. We can relate to it, and it's timeless for me.
I agree.
So Chinua Achebe actually is this early generation of African writers that came to challenge the narrative, the earlier colonial writers, the ones that depicted Africa as the dark continent. This is the generation of writers, along with people the likes of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, that really made it a point that they challenged these old narratives that were created by the early white writers. So he stands tall among African writers.
Yes,
Nice.
but I'd also like to say that even as we appreciate him, I'm glad to see the emergence of new writers, and maybe not all of them so well known, but even on the Kenyan literary scene, I'm seeing a number of younger writers. Their stories are different because the context in which they're growing up is different, and therefore the stories that they tell are relevant to their context and situation currently. And so I am happy to see the emergence of those. I think we want perfection sometimes. We want the perfect book. We want people to get it right the first time. But I think that as long as we have works coming out, we have stories coming out, it can only get better, because that's how you get better, by telling a story and developing. It's a muscle you strengthen as you go along. So I'm excited to read more and more from younger authors.
That brings us to the end of our conversation. It's been a pleasure having you both, and also hearing what you consider to be your favorite books. And as we celebrate the World Book and Copyright Day, let us all always remember that books are more than just pages. They are vessels of culture, history, and imagination. And since you, our listeners, have heard about our favorite reads, we would also like to hear what you consider to be your best African reads. Please do share details with us on our comment sections, and maybe we'll also get to enjoy your books as well, as you enjoy our submission here to be our 2026 read. We also want to know what you're reading and what you would recommend for us to read, and we might just pick it and get to enjoy what you're reading as well. I think we'll end it at that, and we will catch you in our next episode.